concerns the youth. The issue at hand is one that has a little bit of tentacles here and there. The National Youth Council is concerned at the merger of the council itself with other special interest groups. The leaders at the National Youth Council say it is not supposed to be that way. Do they support the greater merger of agencies into one as government seeks to avoid cases including duplication of roles and services? Well, that's a question, and of course others that shall be put to the Vice Chairperson of the National Youth Council, Esther Nancha, and Moses Kidega, the Secretary for Labour at the National Youth Council. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good morning to all the viewers. There
is something we need to clear, and we should be very unequivocal about. You are not comfortable with the National Youth Council getting merged with other special interest groups, but you might be comfortable with the grand scheme of things that sees effort by government merge other agencies. Mr. Kidega, just bring us up to speed with what the bone of contention is.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and to our viewers, good morning. Well, Chris, what forms the background of our contestation with the proposed merger of special interest groups is that fundamentally we think that it undermines the spirit of the Constitution, and precisely Article 32, which enjoins the state to offer affirmative action to groups of society that have been historically marginalized. But also it undermines the spirit of the International Convention by the African Union in 1989 that agreed that member states must adopt a national youth policy, therein establish national youth councils. This the idea around this convention and these laws was that there was a mischief of social, economic, but also political injustice that was meted against special interest groups. And of course, this was informed by patriarchal histories, but also the way our societies were governed historically created an imbalance between different classes of society. So the question would be that in the so many years, ever since the 1993 National Youth Council Act was established, the mischief that it did attempt to address was to lay a clear foundation or streamline a foundation for youth participation in decision-making, youth participation in the economic spaces, but also youth participation in addressing social issues like teenage pregnancies, among others. So the question would be that 30 years down the road, has this mischief been addressed? And I'll tell you no, because Dambisa Moyo, who is a Zambian economist trained by Oxford University, argued in her very, in a book that Uganda and many other low-developed countries experience what you call a dual economy. The gap between the rich and the poor is still very wide. And the young people fall in the 90% of those who have no access to factors of production like land, who have no access to capital. So they have settled for mere being laborers by those who control the factors of production and things like that. So by and large, there's still an imbalance in society that the National Youth Council is there to address. And for as long as this still exists, then the National Youth Council is much more important now than ever.
Interesting there. Esther Nancha, when you look at the overall initiative undertaken by government to merge agencies, I'll just go right here and look at one of the aims. The plan is to ensure that agencies that have been culpable, and especially when it comes to conduct of duty and wastage of public funds, are brought to book, and that whole scenario is capped to ensure that money that would have been either misused, stolen, like is the case on on a daily basis, is galvanized and it's used for other aspects. Do you believe fundamentally that merging agencies, even before we come to the fact that the National Youth Council is one of those agencies that are going to be merged with other special interest groups, do you believe that agencies need to be merged, or that there are a lot of other organizations, agencies and departments that are doing pretty much the same thing, and it's important that that work is brought into an umbrella?
Oh, thank you, Chris, and good morning to the viewers. Once again, I'm Dr. Nancha Esther. I'm a veterinary doctor by profession, and I am the vice chairperson to the National Youth Council.
Yes.
I do not disagree with merging other agencies, but for the special interest groups, like they are called special interest groups, including the youth of the country, including the women, including the disabled, and other people with special needs. Truth be told, we do not need to be merged, because the councils, in particular, I want to focus on the National Youth Council, because we do not, as the National Youth Council, we do not agree with merging special interest groups, the youth being number one. We are the majority of the country, for God's sake. The National Youth Council has given us a very good platform for us as the young people to manage our issues. You know, this country, we really have very many issues as the young people. But through the National Youth Council, we have been able to push for different policies, we have been able to follow up. So what next after merging us under one group? Remember, the young people have a lot of energies, they want to always be heard, they are pushing to see lots of very many issues being handled. They want to push for in case there are lots of issues they want to push for themselves, and then now you're telling us that you're going to be under the same secretariat with women who also have their issues, with people with special needs who also have their issues, with elderly. So the thing is, we want the young people to be given their space. The National Youth Council has been able to nurture very many people. I want to tell you, Chris, that the National Youth Council of Uganda has actually been well performing. It is very well structured. It has a constitution. After being established in 1993, there is a constitution that we follow as the National Youth Council. And you have been able to be benchmarked on by very many African countries. We have received very many, because of the good work we are doing as the National Youth Council of Uganda, we have received very many members of parliament from other African countries. Recently, last year, we had the Zambian government here. Members of parliament come, and the entire department of youth, very important people of Zambia, coming around to benchmark and see how best we are doing it as the National Youth Council of Uganda. And the fact that we are having the organs, we have the secretariat, and we have also the delegates, it is giving with specific roles. It is actually being an example that we are trying to teach other African countries how the young people should be governed, and how will they be there and hear it that the National Youth Council of Uganda and its structures is no longer existing as it was. We really try to move forward. Maybe we are somewhere and then we try to get backwards. I do not really agree with it, and the National Youth Council at large does not agree with merging special interest groups in particular. Surely.
Mr. Kidega Moses, is this a damning assessment of the ability of government institutions to manage particular groups within the entirety of government? Do we need, for example, when you talk about the fact that the youth should be left to operate alone and that the successes have been registered, is it a damning assessment of the ability of government to manage matters?
Chris, this particular year, the NRM shall celebrate 37 years of course, being in power. And over time, they've made tremendous and remarkable contribution in terms of the democratic dispensation of this country. But to be precise, in terms of youth participation in decision making, I think over time there has been inclusivity in terms of youth participation, both in civil society but also in government and also in the political space. Whether this is an indictment on the government to failure to manage these particular agencies is that I think that government should hold the bull by its horn, which is that if the interest is to rationalize and to manage public taxpayers' money, if I'm to call it, then there are so many other ways. There was an Auditor General's report that was produced last year that indicated how many ghost workers government is employing in its public sector. That indicated the level of corruption that happens in government institutions. All this isn't being talked about. That is what we need to address as a country. How about us thinking, of the private sector, because the issue as to why government is trying to rationalize is the grand idea of getting more resources to the national economic basket, right? But there are many other ways of doing that. We have a dysfunctional private sector. There is no economy worldwide that has developed without a functional private sector. Look at our government appetite for borrowing. This year, our debt burden will clock 80 trillion. 80 trillion. All right? That is already more than half of our national budget. So what this means is that the economy is not working. So government should not treat signs, but the symptoms. All right? Government must get back to the drawing board and address the issues that are crippling down the economy. Have more money, partition to Uganda Development Bank, let private players be able to access soft credit. But also government should reduce its borrowing from the domestic commercial financial institutions, all right? Because when government borrows from domestic financial institutions, what then happens is that they're competing with the private players.
It's very heartwarming to hear these solutions being spoken about by youth leaders. Were you consulted before the plans for the mergers were to be undertaken, and were these sentiments raised, and what was the reaction? Were they simply dismissed because at the end of the day you were put under other special interest groups?
Thank you, Chris. And now that is where the challenge is. As the young people, as leaders of the young people, our structures are so clear. We have over 700,000 leaders in the structures of the National Youth Council. And we have leaders, 11 leaders in all the districts. To tell you the truth, we were not consulted about this. Otherwise, we would have raised our issues.
Your national television?
Yes, we were not consulted. I am so clear that the National Youth Executive Committee, nor any youth leader was consulted on the issue of merger. Otherwise, we would have raised all this. The young people want to be included in decision making. There is no way you're going to force us to move along with whatever maybe government wants without us having our input. For us, all we want is, if there is any idea that you want to impose on the young people of the country, strictly you know our structures, you know who to consult, and you know how we disseminate our information. Clearly come out and tell us that this is what we are planning for the National Youth Council. Let us have an input and then have have a resolution at the end of it all. But now the thing is, the way the National Youth Council operates, all the projects that they're having, all the programs that you have at the National Youth Council, and all the different leaders of the young people at the district levels were not consulted. And we are saying we are not going to allow the merger because it is going to do more harm than good to the National Youth Council and all the nurturing and mentoring of the young people that we are really benefiting from having these structures as the National Youth Council.
Please prepare to tell us exactly what you're going to do, because you say you're not going to allow the merger, and this is a process, and the bus has left the station. I do not know what you're going to use to stop it. But also help us, bring us up to speed with how the council has worked to tackle issues of audit of the projects that the youth have been involved in. There are concerns, for example, the Youth Livelihood Project in places like Western Uganda. There are a bit of successes, but in other parts of the country, the youth have been unable to return these funds that are part of a revolving fund project that other people can also be able to benefit from. Now, when youth who are unable to return money are told, we need to streamline the way you do things, or even teach you how to do the things, why should you be seen to reject such effort?
The issue about youth returning funds, for sure, even people, we have been complaining. We have our reports we've handed in to the different leaders in the different offices in government about how these programs have been working. Actually, we have had our recommendations to the ministry, because we are under the Ministry of Gender. We've had recommendations on how these programs should run. But for sure, you cannot wake up one day and start giving a poor youth 1 million to start up something without guiding them on how best to do it. The skills are not yet there. You've not guided them on particularly what to do. The monitoring of the activities by the people who are supposed to do that at some point is not that good, and then you expect them to give you back the money with this poverty that you are having, with the higher numbers being young people, for sure, Chris. The young people are the most unemployed in our country. So the thing is, government should first of all look at, if we are bringing this program, how is it going to work? And how are the youth going to benefit? Include the youth leader, let them give you their information, what they think. And then we have had recommendations for these programs, for sure. We want our people to be trained. But then you give recommendations and they are not taken into consideration. So at some point, I will not blame young people for not bringing back that money, because at some point, probably there is a reason why. And also that CDOs who are supposed, yes, even the CDOs who are supposed to give them the money are not probably doing their role. You send for 5 million, they give you 2 million. You get. So the issue is, government should first of all consult, and then you have always recommended, let them get back to the recommendations we've put in as National Youth Council before they impose another program on us. Let them include us, and we see how best can we make programs benefit.
Interesting there. Moses Kidega, this unfortunately has the hallmarks of a battle for resources, and the fact that the Youth Council or leaders within the Youth Council think or are afraid that the resources will not come forth. Your interests are stated very clearly as youth under the Charter and the Act of the National Youth Council. These interests can be pushed within any framework, just like you would push for Uganda's interests, Ugandan youth interests at the international stage. If, for example, you came together with youth from Kenya, Tanzania, and all these other countries, can't the same framework be applied, especially when dealing with other special interest groups? Because at the end of the day, women have issues, children have issues, the other vulnerable groups, including the blind, there are so many interest groups around the country. You should be able to understand that, shouldn't you? Why do you have to be adamant and want to have your cake and eat it?
Well, Chris, two things. One is that the National Youth Council leaders, the over 6,000 leaders that she has mentioned, are volunteers. They are not being paid by government. So when you look at the Public Financial Management Act as amended, the Youth Council leaders are not part of those that benefit from the taxpayers, money. Whatever money goes to the National Youth Council Secretariat is meant to run youth programs. So if the idea is to rationalize to achieve what exactly? Because the people who are working at the Secretariat, the youth leaders who are elected, are not being paid. They're simply volunteers. So the idea of trying to rationalize for the benefit of saving taxpayers' money is then defeated by the fact that these particular individuals are not paid by government. That is one. Two is that, like I had mentioned earlier on, government should focus on addressing the signs and not the symptoms. There are many other ways through which government can become more frugal in how it manages its public finances.
In other words, this whole process of mergers is not the best possible solution we have.
Not for special interest groups, because it defeats the purpose, like I was telling you. But also, why should we focus on a group that has historically been marginalized, all right? That has historically had social economic injustice meted against them, all right? That have for so long been excluded from the economic space, from the social space, from the political spaces. Why should we have them being cajoled into one sort of group? But lastly, there are many other ways through which government can achieve rationalizing of taxpayers' money.
I was just going to ask Esther Nancha to do the wrap on that. What's the way forward?
All right. I wanted to add on that. The issue of merge. We do not disagree with merging any other agencies as long as government sees that it is that necessary. But they need to refocus on the issue of special interest groups. Like it is special interest people. The young people,
the word special is the key word.
Alone. Special interest group, the word special alone says lots of what it's meaning a lot. So we call upon government, let the National Youth Council of the young people be left alone. Let us, the young people, handle our issues because we know how best we can actually handle them. Nothing for the young people without the young people. Instead of government just empowering the young people, let our structures be empowered. We don't want to be really, we don't want to lose morale in this whole thing.
All right, Esther Nancha, Vice Chairperson of the National Youth Council, many thanks for the insight as well. Many thanks to Moses Kidega, the Secretary for Labour at the National Youth Council. I'm effectively past the age of youth, but I am one that fights and amplifies the issues of the youth. I hope Morning at NTV will continue to do a good job on that. Let's now go